Have you ever noticed this about yourself? Someone misunderstands you, or questions your decision, or doesn't react the way you expected, and suddenly, without planning to, you start explaining. You explain your intentions. You explain your reasons. You explain what you meant, not what they heard, even when no one asked. This is one of the most common unspoken behaviors people carry quietly. The constant need to explain yourself, and most people think it means they talk too much, or that they're insecure. But psychology tells a very different story. What this behavior looks like in real life. This doesn't always happen in big arguments. It shows up in small moments. You cancel plans and immediately give a long reason. You make a choice and rush to justify it. You say sorry before anyone is upset. You explain your tone, your mood, your silence. Sometimes, you even replay conversations later in your head, thinking about what you should have explained better. On the outside, it looks like overcommunication. On the inside, it feels like pressure, a pressure to be understood. A pressure to not be seen as wrong, a pressure to control how others see you, and most people never stop to ask why this pattern exists, the psychology behind it. The need to explain yourself usually doesn't come from confidence. It comes from conditioning. Many people grow up in environments where they were misunderstood often, their intentions were questioned, silence was taken as guilt, or explanations were required to be accepted. Over time, the brain learns something quietly. If I don't explain myself, I might be judged, rejected, or misunderstood. So explaining becomes a defense mechanism, not a habit. Your brain isn't trying to impress others. It's trying to protect you. Psychology calls this anticipatory self-justification. You explain before conflict even appears, not because danger is real, but because it once was. 3. Why it feels so urgent. When you feel the urge to explain, it often feels urgent. That urgency comes from anxiety, not logic. Your nervous system reads misunderstanding as a threat, so it pushes you to clarify immediately. That's why explaining yourself can feel like relief, but only for a moment, because the relief doesn't come from being understood. It comes from reducing internal discomfort. That's why even after explaining, you might still feel uneasy. The explanation wasn't for them, it was for your own nervous system. Point 4. Why some people don't feel this need. You might notice something confusing. Some people are misunderstood, and they don't explain at all. This doesn't mean they don't care. It means they trust something different. They trust that not everyone needs access to their reasoning. Misunderstanding is not always a problem. Silence doesn't equal guilt. They aren't calmer because life treated them better. They're calmer because they learned boundaries around explanation. That's not arrogance. That's emotional regulation. Point 5. When explaining becomes self-abandonment. Explaining is not bad, but it becomes unhealthy when you explain to people who don't listen. You explain to people who already decided. You explain to earn basic respect. At that point, explaining stops being communication and starts becoming self-abandonment. You're no longer sharing, you're pleading to be seen correctly. And the more you do it, the more exhausted you feel. Point 6. The awareness shift. Here's the shift most people never make. You don't need to be fully understood to be valid. Some misunderstandings don't need fixing. Some opinions don't need correction. Some silence doesn't need explanation. Not explaining doesn't mean you're hiding. It means you're choosing peace over performance, and that choice takes practice. If you feel the need to explain yourself often, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It usually means you learned early that being misunderstood wasn't safe. But you're not in that place anymore. You're allowed to let people misunderstand, pause before explaining, speak only when it feels right. The more you trust yourself, the less you'll feel the need to convince others. And that quiet shift is where emotional maturity begins. If this felt familiar, you're not alone. This is one of those thoughts people live with silently, but rarely talk about, and noticing it is already progress.